Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first episode of Up for Growth's 2022 annual webinar series. This episode is the YIMBY Act, shining a light on exclusionary zoning. Special thanks to our sponsors, American Planning Association, CalFE, Halter and Griswold, and the American Institute of Architects for sponsoring this program. My name is Mike Kinsella, and I'm the CEO of Up for Growth. For those of you who don't know us, Up for Growth is a national cross-sector member network committed to solving America's housing shortage and affordability crisis through data-driven research and evidence-based policy. We're very excited to have more than 500 registrants on the line for our presentation today, which I think really underscores how top of mind the issue of housing affordability is in communities all across the United States. As you know, the nation faces a severe shortage of homes, driven in large part by artificial barriers, exclusionary zoning, opposition from residents called NIMBYism. These factors combine to create a severe underproduction of homes. Despite years of economic growth, housing starts have approached some of the lowest levels in history, and our nation's housing underproduction has more than doubled over just the past 7 years. Unjust policies continue to drive working families, people with low incomes, and people of color out of high opportunity neighborhoods, places that are rich in jobs, transportation, and infrastructure. In fact, racial discrimination has been embedded into housing policy for over a century and is a main driver of the housing underproduction that our nation faces. To create access to opportunity and a housing system that serves everyone, we believe that policymakers must prioritize racial and economic equity outcomes and actively work to reverse the nation's history of exclusionary policies. To that end, H.R. 3198 and S. 1614, the Yes in My Backyard, or YIMBY Act, is a bipartisan bill that aims to help cities advance policies to break down barriers and boost production. Specifically, the YIMBY Act asks community development block grant recipients to report which policies they have enacted to convert housing underproduction into housing opportunity by lowering costs, reducing barriers, and boosting supply. The YIMBY Act does not tell local governments what to do. It does not mandate or condition funding to the enactment of any specific local policies. Rather, it takes a sunshine is the best disinfectant approach by increasing transparency into local policy decisions that affect the efficacy of CDBG investments in communities. It provides states and cities with the opportunity to be part of a solution, and it provides Congress with the opportunity to provide critical leadership in solving our nation's housing crisis. This legislation passed out of the U.S. House of Representatives in the 116th Congress without opposition and was reintroduced in this Congress in May of 2021. Its bipartisan sponsorship is led by Representatives Derek Kilmer and Trey Hollingsworth in the House, and Senators Todd Young, Brian Schatz, and the Reverend Raphael Warnock in the Senate. This bill has been endorsed by over 250 organizations spanning multiple stakeholder sectors, including the American Planning Association, the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, the National Association of Home Builders, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, Prosperity Now, and Habitat for Humanity International. Before I get started, I'd like to turn it over to Jason Jordan, Public Affairs Director at the American Planning Association, and our presenting sponsor and a great partner. Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike said, I'm Jason Jordan. I'm the Director of Public Affairs here at the American Planning Association. And on behalf of APA, I'm really delighted to welcome everyone to today's webinar. APA is proud to sponsor this webinar series with Up for Growth, and even prouder to be working with the Up for Growth Coalition in support of zoning reform and new housing policies that'll help communities boost production, tackle affordability, advance equity, and expand opportunity. Today's webinar is particularly important. APA is a strong supporter of the YIMBY Act that Mike just described, and we're equally supportive of what the YIMBY Act actually aims to help communities do. That is to better understand and address potential housing barriers embedded in outdated codes. We believe that the efforts around the country to modernize and update zoning will help communities achieve their vision for a better future reflected in their local and regional plans and planning processes. The housing crisis has made plain the need for zoning reform, and planners are excited to lead this work that will support not only the ongoing recovery, but also the very necessary work of reinvention for a stronger tomorrow. I particularly want to take a second to thank Congressman Kilmer and Congressman Hollingsworth for their strong bipartisan leadership on housing and zoning reform. We look forward to working with them and with others in the Congress to advance this legislation. And again, thanks everyone for joining this important discussion today. And Mike, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate your partnership. Well, today we're honored to welcome the lead sponsors of the Yes in My Backyard Act in the House, Congressman Derek Kilmer and Congressman Trey Hollingsworth, two pro-housing policy champions in Congress who have committed themselves to working across the aisle to advance meaningful solutions to the nation's housing crisis. Congressman Derek Kilmer serves as the United States Representative for Washington State's 6th Congressional District. He has over a decade of experience working in economic development in the Puget Sound region and grew up on the Olympic Peninsula. Congressman Kilmer served in the Washington State House of Representatives from 2005 to 2007, the State Senate from 2007 until 2012, at which point he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He was re-elected to his 5th term in Congress in 2020, and today serves on the House Appropriations Committee and is a member of the House's bipartisan working group. Congressman Trey Hollingsworth represents Indiana's 9th Congressional District. A small business owner, Congressman Hollingsworth began renovating and rehabilitating abandoned industrial sites after graduating from business school, and in 2008 started an aluminum remanufacturing operation based in Indiana. Congressman Hollingsworth was elected to Congress in 2016 and currently serves on the House Financial Services Committee, where he is a member of the subcommittee on housing, community development, and insurance. We're very grateful that Congressman Kilmer and Hollingsworth have chosen to spend their time with us today to discuss this very important legislation, the YIMBY Act. Congressman Kilmer, Congressman Hollingsworth, welcome and thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Mike. Do you want me to go first? I guess I'll go first. Well, first of all, thanks to Mike and Up for Growth and Jason with the American Planning Association for inviting Trey and me to be with you here today. Despite what it may say on the screen, I am not Heather Painter. I am Derek Kilmer, but I cannot figure out Microsoft Teams to save my life. But appreciate the attention to the Yes in My Backyard, or the YIMBY Act. I'm also glad to be joined by the Mayor of Tacoma, my friend Victoria Woodards. Thank you for being here and for providing the city's perspective on this issue too. So as most of you know, throughout COVID and still to this day, housing costs have spiked, and that has pushed the dream of home ownership out of reach for far too many Americans. And I don't think there's a silver bullet to addressing that. I think it's more like silver buckshot. There's a bunch we have to do, but several studies have indicated that restrictive zoning laws remain one of the largest barriers preventing construction of additional housing supply, driving up home prices. So that's really the rationale behind why Representative Hollingsworth and I have introduced this bipartisan, bicameral YIMBY Act. It's designed to identify obstacles to and opportunities for increasing home construction through better zoning, by right development, faster permitting. The legislation aims to encourage localities to eliminate discriminatory land use policies and to remove barriers that prevent needed housing from being built around the country. So specifically, our bill requires local governments that are applying for federal housing development funds through CDBG to report on policies that may affect housing affordability. And the CDBG program provides annual grants to states and to local units of government to develop communities by providing decent housing and expanding economic opportunities. And so recognizing that CDBG funds are critical for localities, the YIMBY Act really seeks to encourage local governments and CDBG practitioners to work together to address some of these severe housing underproduction that we've seen throughout the country and improve the lives of folks who are negatively impacted by a lack of affordable housing. On top of that, the YIMBY Act really aims to increase transparency on local land use policies and to encourage localities to reduce barriers to housing production through better reporting and data collection. We feel that the bill will shed light on positive and negative land use policies and ultimately encourage policy shifts towards those that make the dream of home ownership more attainable for more people. The bill was passed out of the House in the 116th Congress. We've got more than 250 local and national groups who've rallied behind us in this cause, including many of you joining today. So thank you for that. I'm hopeful that this bill, which I think can pass the House again, and this time through the Senate and onto the President's desk too, will play a key part in solving this problem that has hit far too many communities and far too many families. So look forward to your questions and appreciate your interest. Excited about the momentum on this and grateful for the partnership of Representative Hollingsworth. So I'll stop there.
Great. Well, just to follow up on Derek's great overview of the bill and where it stands, I just want to convey my enthusiasm for this legislation and making a difference in our local communities. Everywhere I go across the district, across the state, across the country, housing prices and affordability are top of people's minds. Whether you're a senior citizen or a student graduating from school and looking for your first residence in an apartment or a house, I continue to hear about this challenge. And I think, as Derek well articulated, this isn't a panacea by any stretch, but it is an incremental step in the right direction to encouraging the expansion of supply of housing units all the way across this great country. And I think what's really exciting for us up here is just the support in a wide variety of places and from a wide variety of members, whether they're representing downtown Boston or very rural Kansas. Alternatively, if they're hardcore Republicans or if they're hardcore Dems, I think we've seen tremendous support across the aisle and across every walk of life and experience that we have up here in DC. It passed by committee last Congress with unanimity. It passed by the House with near unanimity. I believe that we are going to see that same thing happen again. And I think we're going to see a resurgence of momentum in legislation just like this as we head into election season, as more and more of us focus on how can we incrementally move the country forward and find solutions that are bicameral, bipartisan to problems that Americans are raising with us every single day. And I got to tell you, compliments go to Derek. He has been a tremendous partner in the majority, making things happen, talking with different members and getting us to the point where we can attach this to something that's moving, get this across the finish line here in the House, get it across the finish line in the Senate, get it signed into law so it can start making a difference in each of your communities. Thanks, Derek.
And with that, my name is Barbary Himiga. I am the Legislative Director at Up for Growth Action, and I will be moderating the questions to Congressman Kilmer and Congressman Hollingsworth. Thank you again, gentlemen, so much for your participation and leadership on this bill, this critical bill. And respecting your time, I'm going to jump into the questions. This question is for both Congressman Kilmer and Congressman Hollingsworth. What are the actions coming out of various state legislators right now that are most likely to be worth adopting nationwide?
Derek, you want to take that first?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, to Trey's point, the good news is that we've seen action out of both red states and blue states, understanding that zoning laws are holding a lot of communities and homeowners back across the country. Nebraska passed legislation just this last year that requires cities to basically prepare affordable housing plans and submit reports to their legislature detailing what they're going to do to address the availability of and incentives for affordable housing, covering things like zoning codes and ordinances and regulations, very much in keeping with the ideas laid out in this bill. Maine also this last year formed a commission to increase housing opportunities in their state by studying zoning and land use restrictions. And their commission laid out 11 recommendations, again, very consistent with the work of, with the ideas laid out in this bill. Oregon, a very blue state, has set minimum standards for residential zoning and disallowing cities to zone out accessory dwelling units and duplexes and triplexes on single detached lots. So I think what that shows us is that there is interest in the state. Some have asked if states or localities will be able to handle additional reporting requirements, and that, but examples like this show that there is a clear appetite at the state level to work on YIMBY Act like efforts.
Yeah. And look, I would second that. I think the other thing is Derek and I were really talking about this legislation, trying to figure out the right steps forward. One of the things we ran into was our system of federalism, right? We wanted localities to still have control over what they wanted their futures to be. We didn't want the federal government to tell San Francisco that their policy had to be identical to Lincoln, Nebraska, right? We wanted them to be able to make decisions that are best for themselves, but incentivize the right type of behavior that expands supply and opportunities for people to move into these areas. And so what I'm really excited about is we've seen a wide variety of efforts undertaken by state legislatures in different ways, different methods to solve this problem, different incentive structures to solve this problem, different mandates in certain states to solve this problem. And I think what I hope comes out of that is what the best of federalism has to offer, which the best solutions I hope will migrate all the way across the country, right? People will come up with really good ideas in, Illinois that can then be replicated across the country, or really good ideas in Alabama that can be replicated across the country. So I think what we've seen is not just a singular effort to tackle this in a single way, but instead a wide varieties with a cornucopia of solutions to this problem. And I hope the best of those rise to the top and get migrated and replicated all the way across this country. So that was something that Derek and I really focused on, is how do we not have too heavy a hand from the federal government, and I think states are striking that same balance in acknowledging that localities need some discretion and control, provided that they are incentivized to do the right things for their constituents, their communities, and the country as a whole, and housing affordability.
Thank you for that answer. So kind of getting to that, what do you think are the long-term and short-term costs of communities if, they refuse to re-examine these exclusionary zoning practices?
Go ahead. Why don't you take first swing?
You got it. Look, I think there are going to be tremendous repercussions to communities in two big dimensions, right? Number one of the first things, we're trying to incentivize people to include this as a part of their submissions for CDBG grants, right? So they might be cut off from funding. They might be put down lower in priority in federal government funding by virtue of their failure to adhere to best practices and expanding the supply. That's one big avenue and a big lever that Derek and I have to pull. But I think the bigger thing that should be driving communities to think about this is just they will get fewer residents that move to their communities, right? Everyone's competing for talent today. Everyone's competing for people today to come to their communities and pour out their unbelievable talents in making that community, the businesses therein, the future thereof better. And so I think the real downside to not thinking about these things, not revisiting these policies, not developing these best practices, not implementing them quickly enough, is that people will be excluded from your community. People won't move to your community at the same rate they might move elsewhere. We have seen, especially over the last couple of years, given all that we've been through, that Americans are being enabled, many Americans, not all Americans, are being enabled to work in more locations that they can choose, not just locations that their employers are choosing. And so people are choosing with their feet again, right? People are saying, I want to live in place A, not place B. I want to work in an environment that has a great quality of life for my kids, great schooling opportunities for those kids, right? I want to work in a place where my husband or wife can also get a job. I think states are really starting to revisit these things. Municipalities are really starting to revisit these things so they can attract the type of talent that they are going to need to compete in the 21st century. I believe that the real downside to not thinking about this, certainly part of it comes from the federal government, but the bulk of it comes from Americans that are going to choose to go elsewhere, moving out or not moving in. Derek, go ahead, bud.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is we had issues throughout our country, and certainly in my neck of the woods, related to lack of affordable housing and homelessness pre-pandemic. Those challenges have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and this is a supply problem. Up for Growth, frankly, has done some of the best work looking at just quantifying the cost of housing under production. And, you see it in loss of GDP. Up for Growth, in its report, said a cost to our country of about $2.3 trillion lower GDP than it would be otherwise if it weren't for exclusionary zoning and some of the artificial barriers that we've seen. For everybody who's tired of sitting in traffic or concerned about automobile emissions, when Up for Growth looked at this issue, they said it could, by encouraging more infill development and by driving some greater density, You could reduce vehicle miles traveled and cars on the road by as much as 28%. That's a big deal. And so we see it in a lot of ways. We see these costs in significant ways, both to the people that we represent and the communities that are grappling with this challenge. And I think that's really what this bill is about, and why Trey and I have been working to try to get this across the finish line.
So what specific features within zoning laws are you targeting as defined as exclusionary zoning? You know, what data and evidence is backing that selection of those specific zoning features?
Yeah. So some of the barriers targeted within YIMBY are, exclusionary single detached only zoning, which prevents affordable housing and multifamily housing from being built in large portions of communities. Things like minimum lot size requirements, which again prevent some of the smaller housing formats like tiny homes or accessory dwelling units or duplexes and triplexes from being built. Density and Florida area ratio restrictions, which limit the number of homes that can be built on any given property. Lengthy and unpredictable permitting processes and timelines, some of the minimum unit square footage requirements, height limits. We saw the Obama White House publish a housing development toolkit back in 2016, and it really lays out in pretty substantial detail not just what these barriers are, but why they matter and why they impact affordable housing. We've seen similar work done by the Cato Institute outlining some of these barriers and what addressing this could mean for our communities.
Yeah, I think all of that's right, Derek. I think one of the really good features that we've tried to retain in YIMBY, frankly, is enabling communities to still have some control over their destiny, right? Because each community is really different. I'm certain Derek's community probably has a lot more climate risk and needs associated with that as it pertains to their specific codes, et cetera. We in Indiana certainly still affected by same, but maybe less so, or have different needs with regard to that. We wanted to retain some features of communities to be able to say, look, we are addressing these issues, but we're addressing them in our own unique way with these metrics, not these others that we want to retain as a feature of our community or something that we need to protect against that's specific to our community. So we really wanted to hit the whole gamut, but we wanted to be careful that we weren't too prescriptive in exactly what they needed to do in response to this, but instead enable them to toggle their own pieces in their own unique way in hopes that that local control can be combined with the right incentive structure to expand supply. So that was something Derek and I really worked closely on to make sure that we didn't tell them, you need to fix exactly this to exactly this level, but instead enabled them to do the right things for their communities by incentivizing that structure.
That makes sense. And I guess the last question I have for you, it's a two-part. How does this bill consider the need for more federal housing vouchers? One, and what ways can Up for Growth members and the folks who are part of this webinar, how can we help move the YIMBY Act forward?
That's a great question. I love that you guys are asking that. Frankly, you guys have been an integral part of moving the YIMBY Act forward, you and your members, and talking with members of Congress and talking with senators, and frankly, making sure Americans know about this issue every single day, or thinking about this issue every single day. Look, this is not going to solve every problem, and there are a wide variety of levers that the federal government can pull, local governments can pull in order to begin solving this. There are other larger societal questions, economic questions that are driving this as well. But this is a step that we collectively as members, and I hope as Americans, can agree is in the right direction and could make a difference. And so I think continuing to advocate day in and day out to ensure that this remains top of mind. Look, there are a lot of challenges that exist today. Derek and I go to a lot of briefings, a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations with both constituents and counterparts that have real challenges in their communities and real challenges around the world. We want to make sure that this doesn't get lost in that cacophony of voices. And I think you guys do a great job, not only of advocating for this, not only for advocating for housing generally, but I think buttressing that with real and meaningful data. Derek mentioned some of that, but saying this is the cost to waiting, right? This is the cost not just to American GDP, the economy writ large, but to a family in Washington State, a family in the Hoosier State. These are real costs that they're incurring every single day that this is delayed. And this is, as we said, something that passed with unanimity out of committee, passed near unanimously on the floor. This is something that should get done. And I believe hopefully this summer, Derek will find a way to get the majority to throw it on the floor and make it happen again so that we can get it through and signed by the president.
Yeah, and I'll try to take a swing at both of the questions you asked. I think eliminating exclusionary zoning is not a replacement for some of the demand side interventions like housing choice vouchers and the like. You know, on the other hand, simply increasing housing voucher supply without addressing housing under production of homes will not broadly benefit affordability. And so I think we've got to try to pull a lot of these levers, just acknowledging that there's not a silver bullet here. In terms of what folks who are watching can do to help, reach out to your members of Congress. Ask them to, if they're not already a sponsor of this bill, ask them to sponsor it. Particularly members on the Financial Services Committee, that is the committee of jurisdiction on this. That would be especially helpful if you are represented by someone who serves on that committee. Reach out to them, tell them what matters to you, and tell them where you see the value of this policy.
So with that, I'm going to thank you guys. Thank you, Congressman Hollingsworth. Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. We truly appreciate it. And we will turn to our moderator for our panel. I have with us Emily Roush-Elliott with the American Institute of Architects. Emily is a social impact architect who's worked abroad and in the US designing and executing projects that improve public health, preserve affordable housing, and increase equity within the built environment. Currently, Emily works throughout the Mississippi Delta region, leveraging her organization's creativity, public and private partnerships, and undervalued construction assets to enhance equity in rural, underserved communities. And with that, I'll turn to Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm just already really excited to have this conversation based on the conversation that we already heard. I'm joined today by three people. We have Mayor Woodards, Brandon Mendoza, and Aaron Sorrell. And we're going to talk for, we have about 26 minutes, 24 minutes. So because we have a limited amount of time and you all have so much knowledge, I would ask first, if you can just give a 2-sentence introduction of who you are, and then we'll let people get to know you through your work better. But first, Mayor Woodards, would you just give us that very brief introduction to yourself? Yes.
Okay, great. My computer sees.
Oh, I don't hear you now. I did before.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, good morning, everybody. My name is Victoria Woodards. I have the proud honor of serving as mayor for the city of Tacoma, the place that we call the city of destiny. And I'm so grateful to our Congressman Representative Derek Kilmer, who's been working very hard on our behalf, and we're very supportive of this, and appreciate him for inviting me to be here this morning.
Great. Great. Thank you. Brandon, will you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Brandon Mendoza. I'm the executive director for NAIOP Pittsburgh. NAIOP, for those on this discussion that does not know, is the Commercial Real Estate Association. We have members that are developers, brokers, and folks in the industry: engineers, architects, finance, legal, and construction. So all the elements you need, to get a commercial real estate deal off of the ground. We obviously have a big interest in this. Is one of our largest investment classes. From a CRE perspective, is multifamily investments.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, if you'll just give us a quick intro to yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Aaron Sorrell. I am the owner of Community Planning Insights. We are a small planning firm out of Dayton, Ohio. I've been in the planning sector for about 22 years, about 17 of that in the public sector doing grants management, consolidated planning. Our firm has done a number of consolidated plans, fair housing action plans around the country, as well as affordable housing studies in Nebraska, Ohio, and other places.
Great, thank you. So next we're going to have a conversation where I'm going to talk one-on-one with each of you for just 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll get a little more in depth because I think as we just heard, this is a national question, this is a national issue, but of course it has these very specific implications for each place. And so I'm excited to hear from you about your knowledge based on your profession, but really also your place that is unique. So we're going to do that for just a few minutes, and then we'll end with, the 4 of us chatting some more. I'm just going to say that I'm an architect, but I'm fascinated by policy, and I think that there's so much that we can do when we apply our professions to policy questions. I live in Greenwood, Mississippi, which is about 2 hours south of Memphis, so the very rural Mississippi Delta, and so I'll be inserting my specific sort of local expertise on place that it's very rural and very much the Deep South. So let me start with Mayor Woodards, and I think just first zooming in on your place, what specific exclusionary zoning issues have most impacted Tacoma?
So, like many cities, Tacoma is zoned in a way that excludes the type of multifamily and affordable housing development that we need. About 75% of the residential areas in our city were reserved exclusively for single-family detached housing. And like everywhere in the U.S., this is one of the factors driving up the cost of renting or owning a home. For us, it's important to acknowledge the role of redlining and the role that it's played in cities across the U.S., including Tacoma, where we have come a long way from the 1930s, when this racist practice of designating areas where Black people lived financially risky and unsafe. Redlining has had a very real and presents impacts on housing ownership that still persists today. Tacoma's vision for our neighborhoods in our city includes multiple goals. We want to ensure that we move forward promoting anti-racist, anti-displacement, and empowering policies for renters and homeowners, people of all ages and incomes who deserve the opportunity to grow up and grow old in their community. And our vision also includes addressing housing supply and choice, neighborhood livability, and access to affordable housing. It does take a mindset change to embrace diverse housing types and understand that density in housing type diversity is vital for both affordability, equity, and other issues. And it also enhances the strength and quality of life in a community. Changing Minds took a lot of public engagement and education and many meetings with stakeholder groups and infrastructure and regulation, but we worked hard together to get to the place we are today.
Thank you. Looking at the YIMBY Act, the specifics of this act is one of the things that people might not understand as well, sort of what it'll look like yet, is that it's providing this pathway for cities to report on their housing policies. And of course, this is going to look really different across the country. Where I live in Greenwood, we're not going to have a lot to report on for a while. We're going to work on it, but you all in Tacoma are going to have, you're ready already. Can you tell us a little bit about your amazing Home in Tacoma project? And that I hope will become better known as a result of YIMBY.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this project. It is one of the most forward-thinking and progressive opportunities that is happening in the state of Washington. As somebody who grew up here in Tacoma, I really had the chance to live in almost every neighborhood because there was something affordable in every neighborhood. But that's not the case for so many now. The reality is dramatically increasing. Is that the dramatically increasing housing prices are making that sort of flexibility and opportunity less attainable for so many. It's a sad change and a trend which is not good for creating cohesive, equitable, and inclusive communities. Home in Tacoma is one of the several steps in the city's Affordable Housing Action Plan to increase housing options, affordability, and supply across multiple income levels. As I said, it is one of the most expansive, flexible, missing middle residential policies in the state, and is designed to be one of the tools the city will use to keep pace with the anticipated growth. We all know these changes are not easy, not just because of community concerns about density, losing neighborhood character or impacts, but also because over many decades, we have throughout this country created a housing development with financing, real estate, lending, and regulatory system that caters largely to single family detached housing. A well-developed and integrated system that won't easily shift to facilitate missing middle and other more affordable and efficient housing types. We've developed this policy over 2 years and included robust community engagement. Public input was a critical component of passing this ordinance. And we talked to residents. They told us about what they cared about, size and scope of new developments, protection of historical structures, neighborhood character, and environmentally sensitive areas, just to name a few. And as such, Home in Tacoma is uniquely tailored to the character and needs of our city. We finished phase 1, which will increase the number of housing units in Tacoma over time, with emphasis on expanding the missing middle housing options. And so we're really excited about this project and look forward to continuing to move it forward.
Great. Thank you for articulating that so clearly. I'm actually going to move to Aaron, and then we'll come back because I have so many more questions for you. Aaron, you're in Dayton. I actually grew up about an hour from Dayton, so I'm interested to hear what's going on there. And specifically, same question, what are the exclusionary zoning issues that are most impacting Dayton and projects that are planned and maybe limited by these things?
So, well, yeah, I live in Dayton and work in surrounding communities and with surrounding communities as well. So I think it really depends on the jurisdiction. So the Dayton was itself as the city was very proactive about 10 years ago in updating its zoning code and working to help reduce these barriers and this exclusionary zoning efforts. Other communities haven't been necessarily as taken that opportunity. I'm writing a number of zoning codes throughout the Miami Valley, and most of the zoning codes haven't been comprehensively updated since the mid-90s. And so they do have, straight single family zoning. They don't allow by right two family or really have a lot of multifamily opportunities. So I think they're not only in Dayton, but in other areas that we've been working. One of the congressmen mentioned Nebraska and their efforts at the state level. We've done a number of comprehensive plans and housing studies in Nebraska. And when we interview businesses, their number one issue is housing. So housing isn't just necessarily an affordability and equity issue. It's also an economic development issue because these companies are looking to relocate or not expand because of the challenge that they have. And it's across all sizes from 600 to 6,000 to, Omaha itself.
That's helpful. I want to take a small sidestep from the script just because I feel like as an architect, I was new in this space for a long time and there were often terms I didn't understand. For anybody who doesn't understand it, can you give us the brief definition of what by right to family housing means?
Yeah, sorry, I will try to keep the jargon to a minimum.
No, you did great. I just thought that's something that for a long time tripped me up.
Yeah, so in zoning codes, you have essentially what are permitted uses, which are what they're called by right uses. You have the ability to just go in, pull a permit if you meet all of the requirements. You have conditional uses, which are kind of the next step in the regulatory framework. In a lot of central cities and urban cores, historically, they have allowed by right zoning of 1, 2, and possibly 3 families. So you have that missing middle housing. A lot of that changed in the 50s to where in the suburban growth, you had just single family home zoning that allowed by right. Anything above that typically went through a larger planning process, which is where you then get the NIMBY activism with neighbors and others coming sort of out of the woodwork to protest higher density or those housing types that aren't like theirs.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think of by right as just a smooth path as opposed to a bumpy one. And so speaking of smooth paths, you mentioned a lot of these communities that haven't done updates in a long time. And I wondered if you can just speak to difficulties that YIMBY might pose for communities, or conversely, how it might be really an encouragement to those communities that are overdue for these updates.
Yeah, so I think one of the big positives about this legislation is that it does prompt a community to take a look at their zoning ordinances. As I mentioned, the codes that we're involved in updating haven't been looked at for nearly 30 years. And partly because, the staff is just doing day-to-day work. This doesn't become a high priority. And so this legislation prompts, at least every 5 years, a look at what incremental changes could be made within the permitting process that could encourage additional housing production. And a lot of this for entitlement communities, about half of what's being asked for is either already being done or should be being done as part of their fair housing assessment. So it really just adds kind of that step for, the one thing I should also say is in many larger communities, there can be a detachment between the community development staff who are working with their subrecipients, who are administering the day-to-day CDBG funds, home, shelter plus care, et cetera. And then the policy side on the planning group, those who are writing the zoning codes, who are administering the zoning codes. As cities get bigger, there's sort of a larger gap between those two groups. In smaller communities, it could be one and the same, but this allows, I think, the opportunity for those two groups to come together and spend a day or so and taking a look, and then creating that action plan on which of those items are low-hanging fruit that can be addressed and which ones maybe need a longer community conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful, thank you. Okay, Brandon, so we're gonna talk to Brandon next about Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, as you know, I love that we're jumping around. We're seeing all these different perspectives on the United States. Pittsburgh, from my perspective, in rural Mississippi has gotten very expensive, but in compared to places like New York or Philadelphia, of course, it's extremely affordable. So if you can just give us the insights first on how exclusionary zoning issues and also shortages of affordable housing are really specific problems in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, absolutely. And one, I just want to say, I mean, this is a great panel, and I'm paying attention to the chat because I want all of the links that you guys are talking about as well. So, just wanted to say that in Pittsburgh, as you said, we are for the top 50 metros, we are relatively one of the most affordable metros. However, our rent has been growing at a steady pace. The challenge that we have in the CRE, community, and us that are trying to help advise in terms of how to maintain affordability long term in our city is that much of the thought leadership within our urban policy and folks within our politics, believe that the way to stop that rent growth is to slow down new investments, the way that this is a lot of their thinking has been imported from other cities that have tried these strategies over the past 20 years, ironically, that have also seen their affordability problems grow even worse. So, challenge for us in Pittsburgh is, we're not as bad as some other cities on the affordability scale, but we are definitely on that path if we don't start building enough housing, multifamily, single family, you name it. We need more housing in general. And I think, we as a nation overcorrected after the '08 recession, and we need to wake folks up to understand that overcorrection has long-term effects and impacts. And that's why I'm excited about this legislation, because we need legislation that can help shock folks into understanding that, so.
That's helpful. I think one thing I find also really, when I was reading about you and your organization, I said, oh, but they're commercial and they're this sort of bigger scale. Can you talk about why housing is important to you when you look at the economics from a macro level?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I just had a conversation with somebody the other day that was asking about commercial real estate in general, and they thought immediately that for commercial real estate meant office. And I tried to explain, like, listen, of course we have a ton of folks invested in office, and that will be an asset class that will maintain its strength and will be flexible and all of that. And obviously, there's a big focus on our downtown office spaces, trying to get more, multifamily. But so commercial real estate is office, is retail, is industrial, is mixed use. It's hospitality, right? And also importantly, those dollars will flow where they need to flow. From our perspective in the CRE community, when I meet with an office first developer or industrial developer, and they ask me, why are we focused on housing? Mind you, I have plenty of developers that are multifamily first as well. So, but I try to explain them, from a policy standpoint, a lot of our policy thought leaders and a lot of our elected officials are seeing new commercial real estate investment as impacting housing, regardless of what you think. And they are enacting policies based on that. So part of what we're trying to do is not be the no folks, but say, hey, listen, we actually have a lot of folks that can help you with fact-based ways to produce more housing, to incentivize more housing, so that I tell folks all the time, in the CRE community, we've got good lawyers. There's a lot of avoidance strategies that can go on. Why do we want to play that game when we can play the game of making it when we can incentivize more housing?
I love it. I think the way you just framed that, instead of being no people, NIMBY people, we want to be yes people, YIMBY people. I'm going to move to our conversation portion now, and my first question is, if we are YIMBY people, we hope that's where we're going, yes people, and we hope we see these changes. One of the things I often criticize community development professionals for, especially architects, is that we do a bad job of measuring and demonstrating our impact. What are the metrics that you're looking at today, and that you hope down the line you can reflect and say, from that moment when YIMBY, and hopefully other things came into effect, what are you measuring now and hoping to see a positive change in the future? That's for anybody.
Well, I'll jump in real quick. So the studies that and our clients that we have done work with, oftentimes the metrics that they are looking at is, are the needs gaps closing? So there's the quantitative gap that is pretty easy to calculate, as far as housing versus the various household needs. So that's you measure what's important. So measuring the ability to close those gaps is the number one thing that many of our communities that we work with are looking at. Secondly, I think is kind of to your point about by right, the easy path is how long does the permitting process really take? Are there ways that we can shave days off of that? That's especially important on the development side or the developer process. They don't want necessarily to get drug through a long, convoluted process and have that uncertainty.
Thank you. Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm having some issues with my microphone this morning. Two things real quickly. One, I think for us, in addition to what was just shared, I think as we think about measuring the number of units that are built and making it easier for developers, I think someone asked a question in the chat about community's response to our home in Tacoma, and there was a lot of pushback. And so I think for us, as I think about what we measure, it also is, as we are moving this home in Tacoma process forward, that as we're building, we're making sure that we're building into the character of neighborhoods, that we're not upsetting, that we're proving the people who said, no, don't do this, who are really against it, that it can work and it won't be as intrusive as you think it is, because we're being very thoughtful about where we build the density at. And so making sure that it's on transit corridors, that there are other natural neighborhood characteristics that we're building in those places where it makes sense, and not right in the middle of a block where there's nothing but single family homes. So making sure that our inclusionary zoning works and works in the right way.
Great. Did you want to jump on that one, Brandon? Or I have time for one more question, but I want to give you an opportunity.
I'll jump on that quickly. In the state of Pennsylvania, we are actually sitting on an opportunity right now, being that our funds from the American Rescue Plan, we've only used about 14% of them. So we're sitting on about $6 billion in the state of Pennsylvania. One of the numbers that I want to see over the next year or two, especially as we go in, we'll start a new governor's administration in 2023, is how much of those resources can we bring from the CRE community, our mayor's office, and everybody else to bring those back into actual closing the financing gap for affordable housing projects in the state of Pennsylvania, and obviously in Pittsburgh. We got $6 billion unappropriated, unauthorized, or anything else. As someone once said, show me the money, right? And this is a perfect opportunity for us to put our money where our talking points are.
Thank you. I think the three of you really demonstrated the breadth of this question with those answers. So we have 2 minutes left of our conversation, and looking at the chats, I think one of the sort of topics I want to pull out is that that Representative Hollingsworth was saying, this isn't holistic, and he described it as a step in the right direction. So we're excited, but it's one step, and I hope that there are hundreds. So if you can each take 20 seconds, we'll pretend we're on a radio show. 20 seconds, what do you hope to see next? Mayor Woodards?
Well, you would get me as I'm thinking about I'm so engrossed in making sure that this works. But here's what I hope that what this does is it allows us to prove that it works. And that whatever the next step is, it won't be so difficult to get it done, because people will have a little bit more trust in the fact that that we need to move in this direction, that our cities and towns are growing, and that we need to make things more affordable. That people will look at that and go, okay, well, that wasn't that bad, so I'm ready for the next step.
I hope so too. Aaron?
Yeah, I'm actually going to echo exactly what the mayor just said, and so that these incremental changes don't shock the system, and that, because when that happens, then there's a knee-jerk reaction to the other extreme. So I think these incremental improvements are the way to go. Great.
Brandon?
Honestly, what I want to see is I want to see the YIMBY Act enacted. And I want everybody that's on this call, to take that momentum into our local jurisdictions and into our state capitals to get more momentum for similar type legislation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. It's just been a pleasure talking with you. I hope we can do it again in the future. And Mike is going to end with a few announcements.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our speakers for providing some great insights today, and really want to share a special thanks to Congressman Kilmer and Hollingsworth, not only for joining this webinar, but also for all the great work that they're doing on the Hill to advance pro-housing policies in Congress. Thanks also to our panelists, Mayor Victoria Woodards, Aaron Sorrell, Brandon Mendoza, and of course, Emily Roush-Elliott. We appreciate your time and insights and everything you are doing in your communities to break down barriers to housing. And finally, a word of thanks to everyone who tuned in for this webinar. Once again, we had over 300 people join us today from a diverse spectrum of organizations, and we're energized by the interest shown to this vital issue. We hope that everyone leaves today not only a little bit smarter, but also inspired to take action to eliminate exclusionary zoning towards the goal of building more equitable, affordable, and sustainable communities across the country. On a programming note, our next webinar will be held in April and will feature a deep dive on policies that communities can enact to create more affordable homes with lasting affordability and a particular emphasis on mixed income communities. Please join us and learn from a panel of policymakers, advocates, and housing practitioners from across the nation. In the meantime, for more information on Up for Growth and our mission, or to join us as a member, please go to www.upforgrowth.org. Thank you again, and have a great day.